All right, so I'm here with Aicy for another interview. For anyone who doesn't know, Aicy is the gameplay designer and balancer for LittleWarGame. He's previously a top player, but this topic is going to be governing more how he thinks about the game. So, Aicy, nice to meet you. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. I had a nice day. It's Friday, so I'm celebrating.
Of
How are
course.
you?
Oh, I'm doing well. It's Friday, of course. How can I be upset? So there's a lot of things that we're going to get into, perhaps in another interview about your time as a player and what you think of players in general or Little War Game. But let's get into this, right? You're in charge of gameplay balance and design for Little War Game. So I'll just start openly. What do you think is good and unique about Little War Game? Like, what do you want to preserve in Little War Game?
Um, there's a few things. I came from SE2, and before that I played lots of RTS games when I was younger. And what I really liked about SE2 compared to the other games was the competitive aspect of it. But SE2 does a lot of things wrong, and Little Wargame does a lot of things right. So something I really like in Little Wargame is the length of the fights. So purely the fact, so there's a few different factors that play here. So one is that Little Wargame has like high health to damage ratios. So units get produced not that much slower than they die. So you can be fighting with wolves in the middle of the map for quite a long time, and it's just like a constant micro. And that plus another factor, which is that there aren't really any complete map controlling units so much. Or like most players can often move out on the map if they need to, and that allows like mid-map skirmishes to happen quite often. So you'll get raiders versus wolves in the middle maps, wolves versus wolves, that kind of thing, because there aren't these things that there isn't really factions that just block you from taking control of the map. And that's one of the main things I really like about Little War Game. Another thing that Little War Game does really well is it's not the skill isn't Twitch based. So there's lots of games where a lot of the skill comes from being able to react really quickly and doing a bunch of and paying attention to very specific things. So this is true for games like CS:GO, and it's true for StarCraft 2, where if I'm not looking at my army for 2 seconds in StarCraft 2, I'll lose the game. And some people say that's a version of the type of skill, and it is, but it's not. That's not why people play Little War Game, and I think that's something that people who play Little War Game get, who like they appreciate differently to StarCraft 2, and that's why they like it. That's why they play it, because it comes from different skills. It's not about I wasn't looking at my army or I did some marine splits really quickly because I can track everything. It's more about the broader strategy, unit control, knowing what you're doing, controlling part of the maps, controlling bases.
So one way of phrasing that is you're not a fan of terrible, terrible damage, or even if you enjoyed it in other games for the competitive aspect, you're not looking to bring something like that into Little War Game.
Yeah. So terrible, terrible damage is a famous phrase by the game designer of StarCraft 2, Dustin Browder, and like that, and Dustin Browder, and I am not a fan of that at all. And I think it's just it's exciting, but it's also not exciting. So it's exciting in the sense that, oh, look at all these units die really fast, but that happens, and then the next 20 minutes is nothing, right? The whole army dies in 10 seconds, and one player lost the game. Great. Like, it's not very fun to be on the receiving end of terrible, terrible damage. So I want the game to not have all these frustrating aspects where you lose for a reason that feels unfair. It's like, oh, they had this really good unit, and well, I can't beat it, so I lose.
Yeah,
that's not enjoyable.
So part of this goes into a thing that you famously said, and if it's not famous to other people, they should hear the phrase loud and clear because it has extra significance because of the position that you have in development and in crafting the state of balance and gameplay design for Little War Game, which is, you said, Little War Game you can play with 70 APM. And so, for anyone who doesn't know actions per minute, I would suggest that is a little low compared to what you can get away with and play at a very high level, or almost need to have to play at a higher level in other real-time strategy games. What is the trade-off between, you stand by that, and is there a trade-off between making LittleWarGame more mechanically simple and making it a deeper play experience? Do they have to be at odds with one another?
I think they are at odds, but and we can't really know until we have loads of people trying really hard to get good at the game. But even with the people we've had, we haven't really seen it. We haven't reached a skill cap. There's still a lot to figure out, and it's still hard enough. And the thing is, no, in any competitive game, the difficulty isn't actually created by the game. It's created by the person you're playing.
Yes.
You know, like the reason the game is hard is because your opponent is good, not because the game has put in arbitrary things to make it more difficult. So they are at odds, but they're not. You need a certain amount of depth, and I think LittleWarGame has it. And that enables it to have a lot of depth and be really fun. It's possible that if a lot of people do play it, they'll start figuring it out. The meta will get figured out, and everyone will start doing the same thing. It'll get boring. At that point, maybe we'll have to add more complexity, but we're not there. And maybe it will never happen, and we can do just slight changes to keep it interesting, and not too difficult. I think a good example is a game like League of Legends, where it's very easy as a new player to play, and things start off slow, and they always go kind of slow compared to a game like StarCraft 2. Mechanically, yes. It's a lot easier for StarCraft 2. I mean, in League of Legends, you need about 70 APM to be a pro player, really. It's about the same, but the depth of the League of Legends pro scene is insane.
Right. No one would say that the League of Legends at a World Finals level is something that, you can just pick this up in a week and there's nothing here, there's nothing to expend on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your plan then for LittleWarGame is more, we haven't reached the skill cap, and I'm kind of glad that you've mentioned that, because it tangents nicely into a thought that I've had, which is, yes, one thing that's interesting about LittleWarGame, even among the players that are playing very hard, is that they don't seem to integrate factions to the same degree. Like there's still a way of thinking about the game that's very sturdy and kind of rooted in other games, but not entirely in LittleWarGame itself. There's a question people ask constantly on this topic. Are you going to make separate factions where you have to pick them at the front? Do you think that's a good direction to put LittleWarGame in?
No, I mean, what I hear way more often is, I think it's so cool that you can split across the map faction. That's like what I hear the most, especially coming from other RTS players or StarCraft 2 players. I go, I like that. I think it's cool. So, no, I'm going to keep it. We want to keep it as not separate factions. It's nice to have. And yeah, it kind of naturally makes everyone a player of every race, which I like. Something I really dislike in games with factions is people fall into tribes. They fall into those factions. You get people who genuinely hate Protoss players. Like, I've got friends who like have this sort of xenophobic belief that Protoss players are inferior humans. It's incredible, and I used to be the same, and that's just what happens when you force people into these camps. And by not having that, that doesn't get created, and you just have a community. So
there's also the freedom that is afforded to you in your position as dealing with gameplay balance and design, which says, look, you don't have to only play with Rax units or Beast units or Mech units. Why don't you try, as part of the proof that the skill cap hasn't gotten to where it could be in LittleWarGame, even though people are trying and are improving. There's a reason I call it the Human Special. That was one of the first people I knew of, besides really early Yummy Blah Blah, where they were trying this mixed faction tactics. And we're just now seeing some of that bear fruit. That gives extra complexity to the game, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think mixing factions is really good. And there'll always be more strategies with that kind of thing. And you're right, it does give a lot more freedom. For example, one of the best ways it gives freedom is in map designs. So maps in most RTS games, are very limited to what they can do with maps. Like, oh, ramps always have to be this wide. Oh, the main always has to be this big. It always has to be a rush
Very
distance between this and this
homogenized, right?
length. Yeah, it has to be very homogeneous, because if they break any of those rules, one of the factions can abuse it, and then the game, well, it's unplayable for one of the factions. But we can have a map that maybe it's got a feature that's overpowered for Beast. In the early game, what does that mean? That means a mech player opens Beast with one then expand, but then transitions into mech. So they can still play their race, but they don't have to. But we can change maps. It could also mean we could just have a map that is overpowered for a race and say, well, you're playing the game not how it's meant to be played. Nobody said that you're only supposed to play one faction,
Yes.
So suck it up and learn the best strat for the map, So it gives that freedom.
And the benefit of doing that as well, because anyone has access to any of these factions and any of these units, like you said, it's not like StarCraft or in other games like Age of Empires where you pick the faction ahead of time, where you might not actually have the tools to overcome the disparity. Like, we saw mech versus mech for the finals of Rhinus versus Works, where Works opened up, as you said, one Den Beast against Rhinus's mech, and it transformed into a whole mech versus mech battle with some dragons mixed in as well. That would never, you would never have that happen if you locked the factions off. And also, balance becomes much more difficult. I want to use that as a springboard, though. So, people often talk about how do you approach feedback? That's the simple way to ask it, especially for balance, but sometimes when people provide radically different design ideas. Like, what do you think of feedback? How do you interpret that?
Oh, I like all feedback. I take genuinely every idea, no matter how stupid it sounds and no matter how new they are. It will, even if it is something that wouldn't fit into the game, it's an idea. If it's somewhat novel, it will give me. It might jumpstart me for another idea that makes more sense for the game. So I want more ideas. Like, whenever people start discussing in Discord about potential features of the game, I am really reading that and really want the discussion to continue. And then when they start talking about some other rubbish, I get annoyed because I want to get gameplay ideas.
Right,
so
right.
I love feedback for the ideas, because I'm not really too much of an idea person, but I'm more of a person who can take the ideas and put it together into the big picture in a way that makes the game, that keeps to all the philosophy of the game design and doesn't break the game and make it imbalanced. And just put the good ideas into place.
So then you touched on something there that kind of springs off of the idea of this feedback. You said things that are against the design ethos or imbalance. But how do you measure whether or not something is overpowered? Because there's a lot of discussion right now about repair for mech might be too strong, or maybe the fact that you could two-shot kill workers with catapults after an upgrade is too strong, or maybe Beast is too strong against racks. You hear complaints all across the community about what is overpowered, but no one seems to be able to latch onto a definition. How do you identify if something's just overpowered or too strong? Because that matters, right?
Well,
you're the person who's processing the feedback.
Yeah, if someone tells me something's overpowered, so first of all, I don't really care that much if something's overpowered too much. It's more about game design. It's more about whether it's enjoyable. But secondly, I do kind of care. And if someone goes and tells me something's overpowered, my first assumption is they just lost a game and they're mad, because that is usually the reason someone's saying. The real way that I find out if something's overpowered is I find someone good and I'll ask them if, let's say, Rax versus Beast is overpowered. I'll play Rax versus them loads of games. They'll play Beast against me loads of games. We're roughly equal skill. I'll play versus Yemi Blava or something, and then we'll see which one's better. Basically, that's the main way I find out, really. if someone just, and if someone tells, it's a lot easier when it's someone like Dragon Archer Z or Yummy Blah Blah. If they tell me something's overpowered, then I can play them, and they have to prove it to me, right? If they say Rax is overpowered and Beast can't beat Rax, well, okay, beat me then. And if they can't, and I figure out a way to counter it, well then it's not overpowered.
Okay. But you said, I think, the more interesting thing there. Well, we'll go into the first question I had, which is, as you do this role more and more, you're taking on a role of a developer, and you're looking at these things and processing feedback. Eventually, if it hasn't happened yet, let's imagine a future where that stuff's impacting your ability to actually play the game. Do you can't play to quite the level that you used to, or you just can't commit the hours because you're dragging elsewhere? How do you outsource and do you at all outsource concerns about whether or not something is overpowered? You mentioned Dragon Archer C and Yummy Blah Blah, but do you specifically go to the top level players? Do you look at replays? How would you, if you couldn't just play it out and figure it out yourself, if that comes to be the case in the future, how do you get access to that thought process? How do you go from there?
So if it became the case that I was a bad enough player, and it could be my skill degrades at the game like every year because I don't play as much as I used to as like RTS games.
Yeah.
I mean, if it got to the point where I think it's kind of necessary that the person making the decisions on balance is good at the game. Like you can't make those decisions without being good at the game or without being pretty high level. So I think at that point you got to resign.
Right?
Specifically balance. The game design, you don't need to be good, but specifically balance, you really have to understand each matchup, how to play it, and the strengths of each and every unit. And you can only understand that if you play the game to a high level. You can't like theory craft it. You have to live it, in my opinion. So if you can't do that, you have to resign, and that's what I would do. I think anyway. I would say, well, someone else who's, if they exist, who's willing to do it should take control of the balance.
And you would probably still be in charge of design, right? Because as you said, like you've got a wealth of game experience for multiple games. You've played a lot of LittleWarGame. I would rank you as top 2 or 3 players of all time for LittleWarGame personally. But if you ever felt your skill degraded that it couldn't help in balance, you would still be interested in the design component, right?
Yeah, of course. And it would probably be an open conversation. So yeah, one thing I would like to mention is just like kind of the open source way that LittleWarGame's been designed. Because I've kind of been balance designer for the last like 3 or 4 years, but only like 30%, because there's been, after Jib stopped making like taking care of the game, it was made as a mod, and it was first by some people who I can't even remember the names of, and they added the Raider and some other units, and they made mod AA versions. And then I started doing some patches, and then I quit, and then Glauber started doing some patches, and the Human did some stuff. He created some units, and people offered different sprites, and like throughout the last few years, if someone wants to create a patch and create balance changes, it really just has been whoever has the best ideas, bothers to put in the effort to make a good mod, and then convinces other people to play it. And that it's not ever been a single person, like from the top, dictating what is LittleWarGame, like the ladder maps. It's always been whoever convinced everyone else to play their mod. And I guess that's kind of changing now, but I would kind of like that kind of open sourcing way of it to continue. Like if someone has an idea on how AA4 should be played, please make a mod, and I'll play you on it. People play on it, and we'll see if your unit is any good, or whatever it is. And if it is, it could be added to the game. Probably would if it is good. Why wouldn't it? So yeah, that's kind of the way. I don't think LittleWarGame should really have like a singular person deciding anything. It's just, I don't think anything should in life. I think
it's accountability, right?
Lots of minds. Yeah, it's accountability, and just more minds create better results than just one person.
The other thing with that too is I have to agree. I've seen people like Human and Invictus and even Owen at times make sprites that sometimes it was just, hey, I've made this sprite, we should try and incorporate it, and then mods like Aicy mod, Itano mod, ladder editions, etc. just incorporated those. And let's go back into something that you said about design, because even if you're not worried about whether or not something's overpowered in terms of balance, I kind of agree with you. I'm on this line of, if something is overpowered, that's not a useful way of referring to it, because there are many ways that you can conceive of something being overpowered, and either the meta will adapt to it being that case, or it will be proven not to be the case, or the meta is stale because there hasn't been someone who's been like beyond with Reapers and just pushed the meta to a point where it is demonstrated in the LittleWarGame context that it is horribly broken. But there is something that people are interested in right now. I would say it's just extremely efficient, or maybe you would phrase it as against the design ethos. Is there anything in version AA4, current version 4.3.1, that you think is actively against the design ethos of LittleWarGame?
Yeah, there's two things that I think are against the design ethos. So one is Fireball. So Fireball can stack currently, and so you can just take 6 mages, shoot them all at once at a clumped up army, and it will just die. Like you can kill like 50 supply just like that, and that is entirely against. That is terrible damage. So one thing I would like to do is make Fireball not stack to solve that. That will require some code changes. So that'll, I don't know how hard that will be to do, but I'll give it a go. So that is one thing. But then the other thing is also catapult drops. Two-shotting workers is also against that design, but it's not too bad. And it does require some knowledge of the game. Like someone
it's not 2016 where they do it by default, right?
They don't do it by default, exactly. So you aren't going to get a brand new player purposely getting a workshop, getting a forge, getting +1, getting an advanced workshop, it requires, it doesn't happen until like you're a decent enough player that people start catapult dropping. It's so, and it's not that easy. Like you do take damage from it, from like you build a tower and a catapult drop is a lot worse. I think they're a cool thing and something unique to the LittleWarGame.
Okay. With that catapult, there is something I want to bring up to your attention. This is the infamous Itano theory crafting that I know has brought many people to rage. So what do you think of next assailability on 2 bases? Because of the way that repair works right now, the design ethos seems to be for other races, if they're on 2 bases, they can be attacked, they can have something aggressive done to them. It might not be successful to the extent that it wins the game, but there are options to damage some workers and get some more scouting information and things of that nature. But with the current way of repair, it seems like mech, at least on the initial 1.5 to 2 base phase, seems unassailable. What are your thoughts on that specifically?
I don't think that's true.
Okay.
So like, I've lost games where I go mech and I've got 4 like Gatling guns sitting in my base, and then Norm just jumps on top of them with 6 raiders and they just die.
Okay.
And you can drop you can kill mech on 2 base if they're not careful. So I don't think that's true.
Okay. Do you think to what extent do you orient balance around the future of how people improve? Because for instance, maybe this is not overpowered or extremely efficient, I would say now, but if players improve, then it may be the case. I mean, famously, people are also quick to say that new things are overpowered, such as we saw with the Raider when it came out. So how do you judge that? Is that back to your gameplay balance, games against other people? How would you phrase that?
Yeah. I mean, no one can predict the future, and tomorrow someone could come up with a new strategy that's really good. Like, there's always new answers to things, and for balance, you can always adjust numbers. You can just, this unit's a bit too strong. Okay, decrease its attack by 5%. It's not a huge deal. If something's overpowered, you can just nerf it a little bit or buff something else. And something like 2 base mag. I mean, I don't see any repair is going to get nerfed. That is good, but otherwise, like I don't see why it's too strong. Like catapults miss most of their shots, so they're pretty bad on 2 base. You just dodge their shots, and Gatling guns are really expensive and weak, and so are gyrocraft. So they're just, the main way is you have to have towers. But if any race has a tower on 2 base, they're pretty safe. So yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't actually break the design ethos the way you see it, because there is counterplay. Just because it's not commonly done doesn't mean that there isn't counterplay. It might mean that the players themselves have to catch up as a whole to something that's understood by upper level players. So you seem throughout this to have been talking about the idea that higher skilled players are the people who can help forward balance and make changes with the numbers, not necessarily with the design. Even players like Mr. Pankaka, who have never been a top player or in that top echelon of players, have shown through mods and design that they can show something about design or implementing a new unit that would be interesting. But for the top level players for balance, are you then worried about the floor of balance? Are you worried about people at the bottom? Like, if you're not, you're not. That's fine. Yeah. That's an ethos. But I'm curious as to how you approach that.
No, I really am. That kind of stuff really does concern me. Is that okay? Yeah, like I may know how to play around a big mech army and counterattack and do all of this stuff, but if a new player is playing Rax and some guy has 155 catapults, and they don't have a lot of multitasking, that they might just lose. So that is something I want to address.
Okay.
It is things like that where it isn't balanced on the lower level.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with that,
I mean, it's hard to do both. Yeah.
No, go on.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's hard to do both, to balance at the lower level and the higher level, but I'll try. And I'd urge to say it's actually more important to do it on the lower level. Yeah.
And that's got to be controversial. No, I'm not leaving you alone on that. Why is it more important to do it on the lower level? Because conventional wisdom is the people who are at the top are the most skilled players. They're showing you what their limits are of all the units and what they can explore and do and how they flex with their skill. And these are also the most dedicated players who are putting the most hours in. So the normal conceit, at least as people who think of esports, right? They think of like competition. That's what they value most. They think, I don't care what happens to the lower level players. Go ahead and balance the game at the upper level because that's what I care about. That's what matters. It's very interesting to hear you say that the lower level might even matter more. Why is that?
Well, I mean, put it this way. Esports are popular. The most popular esports are popular because they're fun games and people enjoy them. Like people don't become a pro player before they're a noob. They're a noob first. They enjoy themselves as a noob, and then they become pro. So, like prioritizing making the game fun and making it good for noobs, and so what I'm talking about here is like it's not possible to balance like a mid-level or noob level player, because there is no, like, from game to game it's so inconsistent that what they do that you can't, like, that it's not possible. But what I want to avoid is things like where it's bad game design and it feels really wrong, where because we've like focusing so long on the top level, we get these things where 100 catapults feels undefeatable and it's not fun. So it's not so much that I want to balance it around the mid-level and it's more important in that sense. It's more about avoiding these bad gameplay elements. And the reason it's important is because the game should be fun, right? Like, yeah, there's all these, there's arguments for esports and all of that, but most players are casual players. And so if you take it from a utilitarian perspective, the best way to increase joy in the world is to increase their experience of the game.
And as you said, they don't become pros and then new players. Like, they don't become, in LittleWarGame context, they don't become high-level respected players that people are seeking games after and then become new. Like, they have to have been new long enough to enjoy the game.
Yeah.
So with that,
exactly,
unfortunately, we're a bit out of time on this one. But do you have any other final thoughts or last topics that you want to get into?
Nothing in particular. That was a good conversation.
All right, excellent. Yeah. Hope to see you back soon, Aicy.